Times are not hidden from the Almighty. Part 2. This is Job's response to his friend Eliphaz. He goes to explain that God knows what is going on in this world, and God cares about what is going on around us. Although there may be injustices, it is by His permissible will that injustices and evil does exist. But true retribution comes from God. This is what Job understands of God, which is a correct understanding. That God knows what is going on, and He is infinite, eternal, and unchanging in His justice. And we can count upon Him to work out His perfect will, although we may not understand the ins and outs of the mysterious providence of God. God's people can trust Him to order all things well for His glory, as they trust Him through the seemingly injustices that goes on in life. Job speaks to us and explains from verse 2 to 11 as he shows us how in this world there is so much fallenness, there is so much sin that is going on, and men struggle in a sense when they see so much pain, so much misery in the world around us. And this was what we were looking at last week. And he went on to tell us that he turned to God. He sought the Lord. And yet, in all the happenings that is going on, the injustices, the pain, it seems as if he could not find God. And Job speaks here and lists, as we saw last week, the catastrophe that is going on in the lives of the human kind, the people around him. Some remove landmarks. Some violently take away the flocks of others. They drive away the flock of the fatherless. They take away the widow's possession. They turn the needy out of the way. When all this happens, as all this goes on, Job sought to find a reason, just as he ponders what happened to him. You remember in Job chapter 1 and 2 is given to us the mysterious calamity that came upon him, how all the destructive effects came upon him. Job chapter 1, and here is given to us the succeeding events that came to Job. Verse 13 of Job chapter 1 says, "And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest daughter's house, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the asses feeding them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I am only escaped alone to tell thee. Oh, he lost his possessions because plunderers came and mercilessly killed all but one of his servants, and his flock was violently taken away. Verse 16, and while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I only am here to tell you. There was calamity from heaven, which he cannot explain. While he was yet speaking, there came also another that said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell on the camels and have carried them away. The camels are we said the modern fleet of cars. Our modern fleet of cars, they were the transport means at that time. And I only am escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. I only am escaped to tell thee. When Job faced all this calamity, now it's one thing to face calamity or to see someone else in their misery. It is another thing when the calamity befalls us. When it comes to our turn, how will we respond? Job responded in faith. Job chapter 1 verse 20 described his response. And then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell upon the ground and worshipped. He submitted to God, the will of God, in the most unbearable time where he could not explain what happened to him. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return hither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Verse 12 to verse 19, our second thought. Righteous and wicked suffer in this world. Isn't it so true? He was, in the eyes of God, in the sight of God, a righteous man. A man who walked with God, a man who does his devotions daily. He would wake up early to pray for his children, and he would take time to set his life right before God. And so when these calamities came upon him, surely it must, if we are thinking that it would happen to us, how would you respond? How would you respond? There are those that would say, I do not trust God anymore. Why would a loving God, a merciful God, allow calamity to come to my life? Well, this is what Job was describing for us in this text here from verse 12 to 19. Verse 12 says, men groan from out of the city, and the souls of the wounded crieth out, yet God layeth not folly to them. It is evident that there were sorrows that were caused by oppression. And this oppression is going on not just in the faraway outskirts of the city, but it is coming to the city itself. And Job did not say how it happened. He did not describe what went on. But here it can be seen that perhaps plunderers have come and robbed and murdered the inhabitants, and then they simply run away. The earth was full of violence. And you see here, as we were studying last Lord's Day in Genesis chapter 4, concerning the life of the descendants of Cain, the men who lived without God. What kind of a life it is? Well, they go for the possessions of life, the material things of life. These are the things that they can take hold of. These are the things that would cause them to have security as they amass and as they build the biggest city, the biggest tower, the tallest tower, and they amass these possessions, these positions. Well, this is the agenda. These are the agenda of the men who live without God. Right? And we saw also polygamy in verse 19 of Genesis chapter 4. The sixth generation, Lamech, from Cain, married 2 wives. And pleasure, the emptiness of worldly entertainment, verse 20 to 22 of Genesis chapter 4. And we saw how men would persecute and prey and bully other men. How might is right in the family of Cain, in the descendants of Cain. And it was not until Genesis chapter 6 that God's judgment came to wicked men through the global flood during the time of Noah. And so as we ponder, and Job trying to reflect and explain concerning the truth that suffering comes to both the righteous and to the wicked. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 16, "And moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work." He saw under the sun how at the place of judgment wickedness was there. At the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. How confusing it is. What a world that is so upside down. Solomon made a survey of this fallen world, and he saw evil and wickedness. He saw the outworking of sin, and he saw 2 opposing factions, the righteous and the wicked. And this is what Job's friends were trying to find a way to dislodge Job in his faith with God, that he was a man who truly lived a righteous life, a life of holiness before God. And Solomon understood that this God, who is the creator and sustainer of the universe, is also a judge. Truly, if there is no judgment, we can live any way we want. But we can't, because there is a judgment. And human society tells us that there is law and order to keep peace in human society. Where wickedness and sin abound, there is chaos, misery, pain, and sorrow. But where the law is upheld, there is righteousness and order and peace. So the Roman orator and statesman Cicero observed in his book, The Republica, he says, "There is indeed a true law, right reason, conformable to nature, diffused among all, unchanging, eternal, which is by commanding, urges to duty, by prohibiting, differs from fraud, not in vain commanding or prohibiting the good, though neither moving the wicked. This law cannot be abrogated, nor may anything be withdrawn from it. It is in the power of no synod or people to set us free from it, nor is there to be sought any extraneous teacher or interpreter of it. It shall not be one law at Rome, another at Athens, one now and another at some future time, but one law, alike eternal and unchangeable, and shall bind all nations through all time, and one shall be the common teacher, as it were, and the governor of all, God, who is himself the author, the administrator, and the enactor of this law. How accurate it is for this man to deduce the knowledge of God ruling and setting a standard for judgment for mankind. It seeks for us to be on the right side of the judge. So, in the mind of Job, he saw all these injustices and he acknowledges that there is all these injustices that's going on in the world. And he, in the back of his mind, could not explain why God allows all this to happen. Verse 13, there are those that rebel against the lights. They know not the way thereof, nor abide in the paths. The murderer rising with the light killeth the poor and needy, and in the night as a thief. Right? There are those who hate the light. John 3:20 says, for everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. Indeed, for those who do evil, they don't want their deeds to be exposed, and so they would perform their deeds in the darkness of the night. And here Job is saying that indeed this is true. This goes on. The murderer rising, verse 14, with the light killeth the poor and needy, and in the night is as a thief. So he tells us that indeed in this world crimes take place. Although crimes take place, but it does not escape the notice of God. God may allow it. We cannot understand why God allowed it. Just as at the beginning, in the first family, God allowed the elder brother to kill the younger brother. And then he was banished from the presence of God. And when he went out, he began a whole posterity of doing evil, as we saw in Genesis chapter 4. But in Genesis chapter 5, which we shall study this week, we shall see how God, in His mercy, by His grace, did not leave Adam and Eve in their tragedy. But God gave Adam and Eve another son by the name Seth. This will be the son who will pass on the godly heritage. So on the one hand, you see evil that is going on, but on the other hand, you also see how God was merciful. God allowed this evil to take place. But there is a difference. And in Genesis chapter 5, you would see a contrast. Right? There are two Lamechs, one in Genesis 4, one in Genesis 5. The Lamech in Genesis chapter 4 is an evil man. He married two wives and he was a killer. Right? He was wicked and he was vicious and he was a murderer, and he was willing to kill just like that. But in Genesis chapter 5, you see a different person. You see a different Lamech. Right? He was one who begat Noah, a godly son. In fact, there is a line of godly men that would come, and you would notice that God allows evil to be manifested in this world, although we cannot understand why. But as you think of it, right, if you have not seen what is evil and know what evil is, then in the time of the redemption, when we are saved, when God gloriously pull us out of our iniquity, of our sins, and we look back. Do we not look back with gratitude to thank God for saving us from where we were in the pits, in the miry clay? Perhaps before you come to know God, your life was very different. Life without God, the way of Cain, the way of destruction. He was on the broad way to destruction. But there is a narrow way, the way by which that will lead to life. And this is what Job is saying to us, that yes, there is evil going on in this world. And he can describe this evil, verse 15. The eye also of the adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, no eye shall see me, and disguises his face in the dark. They dig through houses which they had marked for themselves in the daytime. They know not the light. For the morning is to them even as a shadow of death. If one of them, they are in the terrors of the shadow of death, he is swift as the waters, and their portion is cursed in the earth. They are so fast to do evil, and they will do evil where they would find a way to escape after they have committed their crime, their evil. And so Solomon describes for us the danger in Proverbs chapter 7 when he speaks about the the danger that comes to the young men. He says in Proverbs chapter 7 and verse 1, my son, keep my words and lay up my commandments with thee. Keep my commandments and live, and my law as the apple of thine eye. Bind them upon thy fingers, write them upon thy tables of thine heart. Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman, that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger that flattereth with her words. And so here we are speaking about an adulterer. Then for verse 5, for they keep thee from the strange woman, they keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger that flattereth with her words. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner. And he went the way to her house, and in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night, and behold, there met him a woman with the entire of a harlot and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn, and her feet abideth not in her house. Now she is without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, I have peace offerings with me this day. I have paid my vows. Then came I forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face, and I have found thee. I have decked my bed with coverings and of tapestry and carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. Come, let us take our fills of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with loves. For the good man is not at home. He is gone a long journey. He had taken a bag of money with him and will come home at the appointed day. With her fair speech, she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. He goeth down after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, and as a fool to the correction of stocks, till the dart strike through the liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, not knowing that it is for his life. How frightening it is. Paul says, 2 Timothy 2:22, flee also youthful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, and peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. This was the life of Job. He exemplified a life of holiness, not sinlessness, but a life of holiness. He would follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace. And that is why he's able to say this to his friends. He says that, yes, all these things happen. There are all these injustices that goes on in this world. But I'm not one of those who perpetuate these evil things. I'm not. And he categorically dismisses all the accusations of his friends. You see what was going on, the battle that went on in heaven between Satan and God, that there is no righteous man on earth. There is no such thing as holiness. There is no such thing as the Spirit of God indwelling a man, enabling him to overcome sin in his life. There is no such thing. Job, you think he has a power to overcome? Well, God, by His grace, has empowered His servant to live a holy life. And therefore, he speaks as a man as a God-fearer, as a man who is submitted to God when he could not understand all the calamities that come upon him. He did not dare to utter a word against God. He realized that he is simply the pot in the hands of the potter. God can do whatsoever He pleases. And what can we say? And realizing that this is such a God who has that power to do all this, to judge, he realizes that he cannot escape. If he would do evil, just as Solomon, who has been endowed with all of the wisdom from the Word of God, in the moment of folly, he fell and he indulged himself, and later on he write his sob tale, his regrets, that it's not worth it going that way. Don't go that way, because at the end of it, there is a price to pay. Sin has its consequences. Sin has its consequences. There is a price to pay for going the way of sin. And so Job, in the third thought, tells us from verse 20 to 25 that although there is all this evil that goes on in this world, yet the people of God must not be partakers of this evil. And God will grant them the power to live a holy life, to live a life of righteousness before Him, not by their own strength, but by His grace. And so from verses 20 to 25, Job tells us that indeed all this evil will take place. But he is leaving the judgment to God. He realizes that it is too great for him. He cannot handle. But he knew that God could handle all this. Verse 20, the womb shall forget him, the worm shall feed sweetly on him. He shall be no more remembered, and wickedness shall be broken as a tree. He evil entreateth the barren that beareth not, and doeth not good to the widow. He draweth also the mighty with his power. He rises up, and no man is sure of life. Though it be given him to be in safety, whereon he rested, yet his eyes are upon their ways. They are exalted for a little while, but are gone and brought low. They are taken out of the way as all other, and cut off as the tops of the ears of corn. If it be not so now, who will make me a liar and make my speech nothing worth? Swindoll said well here. He said, we could go all the way down through this list, all the way to the end. There are wrongs, there are failures, there are injustices, there are robberies and sexual sins and hidden wrongs done in the dark. And where is God? He is permitting it. But why? Job says, I do not know. I do not know why God permits it. I think his point here, Swindoll says, is that these things are allowed for purposes unknown to us. Those who done wrong get away with it. Unexplainable suffering falls into the same category. And you and I mentioned events in our lives. Isn't it so true? There are certain events that goes on in the life that God did not stop. He allowed certain calamity, certain catastrophe to go on, to allow to happen in our life. It is a mystery. That's the point. Job says, I can't justify the permissions of God, but I trust Him. Although I cannot explain what is going on, all the injustice that is going on around me, in a sense, it's as if you're going to pull your hair out as you look at the injustices. How can it be? Where is God? And yet, He's going to keep His peace. He's not going to charge God. He's going to be at rest with God, to live his life according to the laws of God, according to the stipulations of God. He's going to live his life according to the righteousness that God has delineated in His Word. And by His grace, He has done so all his life until this point of his calamity. And so Job is saying here that even if affliction would come upon us, we would still trust our God. No matter what would happen to us, we still learn the lesson of faith, the lesson of trust. And what Job is saying here is this to his friends: You think I'm wicked? I'm telling you, if I had my way with God, He would curse every one of them doing wrong. I would stand against everyone that I had named here. Of course, if Job had it his way, if he had the power to right all the wrongs, he would have done so. He could see, and yet God allowed. And yet God allowed. Indeed, Job leaves his case here. God had allowed him to go through this suffering, and he knew that the God of justice, He would work out through justice, and He would leave the matter to God to work it out. Dear friends, there are many situations, circumstances in life whereby we cannot explain. Evil that is going on, that God allows. Does it mean that God is not there? God doesn't know what is going on? Well, Job is telling us that God knows what is going on, but he cannot understand why God allows it. It is higher than him. The purpose by which God is doing to work out His own plan is much beyond his understanding and comprehension. But he knew how he can live his life. Just as the children's hymn goes, you in your small corner and I in mine. Well, we as the children of God shine our little light, do our part, do our daily duty before God, to live a life that is pleasing in His sight, to live a life that God would want us to live. This is how Job presents for us in the midst of all his calamity, where he cannot explain what has gone on with him, and yet he did not charge God. He was willing to maintain his ways before God and to be still, to say that it is well with my soul. You remember the hymn, "It is well with my soul"? Well, this was the theme of our this series of messages, and it is so. It's the hymn 319, and it's so wonderful. Perhaps we just sing in closing this hymn 319. It is well with my soul. We'll sing the first and the fourth stanza. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever, my Lord, Thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. Stanza 4. And Lord, haste the day when my face shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the triumph shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank Thee for granting to us Thy word. In these troublous times that we live in, may it be well with our souls as we look to Thee. May Thy peace fill us, surround us, keep us, that we may be kept strong by Thy grace during this time of need. This I pray with thanksgiving through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.